this part.
Sahana bhavatu, sahana bhunatu, sahadevam karvavahai, tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Mudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Asato Ma Satgamaya Damaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityomamritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Saviturvaram Rupam Jyoti Parasya Dhimahi Yana Satyena Deepaye. So this evening we come to the last 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. Racing through, spending about 10 minutes per chapter, we can't do anything approaching a fair job in tessellating the many subtleties in the text. The teaching that Krishna has presented to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, the field of the Kurus, the field of the Dharma, has insisted upon his taking up his bow, acting according to his real nature, and serving the divine, coming to the divine through knowledge, through works, through devotion. None of these is separable to the Supreme. To be perfectly attuned to the divine, one must be focused in consciousness. One must be focused in feeling. One's actions should be given desirelessly, without claim. And as one gives, as one comes to know, as one comes to love, there is an entire identity that is built up in one. One realizes that no longer are we the real actors on the stage of the world. Really, the divine is conducting all these millions, uncountable billions of lives, processes, maintaining the order of the worlds. And Krishna says to him, "This was my teaching even as of old." Arjuna, who is grasping the enormity of this message, and as he hears it, is able to identify with it, to make it part of his being, asks one more thing. May I see your universal form? May I see you as the Vishwarupa? But when that vision unfolds before him, and he sees all the stadia of the universe, and all the gods and the sages above, and sees the universal form, Kala, time as the destroyer, swallowing all these beings into himself, it is an overwhelming experience. And he asks if he can see again his four-armed form. Now, Krishna on the battlefield has 2 arms, like Arjuna does. So already this means that Arjuna has developed an inner vision. He is aware of the Sukshma Sharira. He can see the inside of things. He has come some distance already in his realization. And then, of course, there's the consummation where Krishna drives the seeker to the recognition that the perfect bhakta, the perfect lover, the one who shares his nature with the divine, is one who also knows him intimately in all the ways and the means of his being, that there is no division. That, in fact, whether one is part of this universe or not part of this universe, if you are in the one, consciously dwelling in communion with the Supreme, that is yoga. And that is the mark of freedom. Not whether you can quit the earth, throw things away, renounce family, etc., and go off and live in a hermitage, wander the streets, live in the forests. No. You can be beset in your mind, living in the forest, but you can be free in your action, conducting all works desirelessly, making them go there to that. And so in these last 6 chapters, Krishna will take this up and flesh it out still more. And he begins in the 13th chapter with the description of the field and the knower of the field. This takes us to the idea of philosophy that later would be formalized, called the Sankhya. The Sankhya school of philosophy focuses very much on the enumeration of the principles of existence. It asks us to stand back in the depths of our soul and regard our nature. And if we do, we will distinguish that this soul is not this body. It is not this life force. It is not these senses. It is not the objects of the senses. It is not the sense of oneself, the I maker, the Ahamkara. It is not even the wise one who looks with intelligence and surveys things. It is not the buddhi either. It is something beyond that. And Krishna has now, in summarizing the essence of this, to give some sense of what it will mean. And he offers the idea that this knowledge, which is not new but ancient, has been sung by the rishis in inspired verse, chanda, and has been spoken about in the Brahma Sutras, which give us a rational and philosophic analysis. But let's be careful here. This is not the Brahma Sutras of Badarayana, of a later age. These are sutras about Brahma, the Brahman. And they may have been the core of what later would become one of the planks of Advaita Vedanta. But we cannot say that this is what Krishna is referring to here. It's a little early in the history for that to be so. The Brahma Sutras follow upon Bhagavad Gita. They don't lead into it. And you'll forgive me if I don't follow every step, shloka by shloka, as we go through here, unless you want to be with me till midnight. I'll set you out a cot on the floor. I'm going to go over to the 13th shloka here in the 13th chapter, where Krishna says, I will declare one object to which the mind of spiritual knowledge must be turned, by fixity in which the soul, clouded, here recovers and enjoys its nature and original consciousness of immortality. The eternal, the Supreme Brahman, called neither Sat nor Asat. He has just given a means, a method by which we can yoke ourselves to that. This is very interesting, to be able to turn your consciousness with fixity upon the idea of the Brahman which is everywhere. I find it interesting because thousands of years later, a devotee writes to Sri Aurobindo and says, on what should I meditate? How should I focus my consciousness when trying to conceive of the divine? And he replied that Om is often the best. But if you need a concept, then the idea of the divine which is everywhere, the one Brahman which is equal stationed in all things, beyond, transcending the universe, and immanent within the universe. Meditate on that. And if you can do that, you will build a power of concentration that burns through the fields, which burns down barriers, which leads the subject, your soul, into a deep union with the object of your seeking, Brahman, the divine. This Brahman, seated equally in all beings, as it says in the 28th shloka, the Supreme Lord, unperishing, within the perishing, he who thus sees, he sees. Perceiving this equal Lord as the spiritual inhabitant of all forces, all things, all beings, he does not injure himself, and thus attains to the supreme status. He who sees that all action is verily done by Prakriti, and that the self, the Atman, the Purusha, is the inactive witness, he sees. When he perceives this diverse universe of beings, abiding in the one eternal and spreading forth from it, then he attains to Brahman. So far away are we from a world-canceling philosophy here. Krishna insists that if you dive into this oceanic being, which is Brahman, you will find that all this world emerges out of it. That this Supreme dwells in it. And referring back to earlier passages, yet remains transcendent of it. This is his divine Maya. But not Maya in the sense that the term would be used later in Advaita Vedanta. Here, Maya, going back to the original root, means to measure out. In other words, for the finite, to station it, for the infinite, to station itself, infinitude, to take some part of its immense being and compress it into this form. And this form, which is small to the Supreme, is the universe to us. Dwelling in Brahman, Brahman dwells in that universe. You have to think of it as the ethereal principle. Remember, he told that to us in an earlier chapter. So, as the one sun illumines the entire earth, so the Lord of the field illumines the entire field. So those who with an eye of knowledge can perceive the difference between the field and the knower of the field, and the liberation from beings out of Prakriti, they attain to the Supreme. So this is the most blessed status, to continue to move and act in the world without confusion, seeing the divine unrolling itself. All the action of the universe is really being done by that. And in the 14th chapter, to which we turn next, he describes a little more pregnantly what he means. Because right away in the 3rd shloka, he says, my womb. He is speaking here as the Purushottama, as the Supreme Person. He's speaking here as the Lord of the universe. He says, my womb is the great Brahman, the great divine, Mahat Brahman. And into that I cast the seed, which leads to the springing forth of all of these beings. This makes us recognize, again, how profound a development has occurred in the Vedantic metaphysics in the Gita. Because the idea was already with us in the Upanishads, secreted in the Veda, but stated clearly in the Upanishads, that there is no difference between this world and that. Brahman is this. The Isha Upanishad says that. Katha Upanishad says that. But now, there is not just this moving world, where we, stationed in it, are the Kshara Purusha, the changing person. And there is not simply that unimpeachable, pure, stainless, unmoving Akshara, where the Akshara Purusha, as the Atman, abides. But above is the Supreme Person, a 3rd person, the Supreme Purushottama. And I know that I'm a little ahead of myself. That's really the 15th chapter, so forgive me for leaning towards it. But here, he's talking about this womb of the Mahat Brahman. So this vast, impersonal reality, undivided, unformed, full of consciousness, full of force, is the field into which the divine implants his will so that the universe comes into being. Now, it's true that there is no idea of the Divine Mother, of a Mahashakti, Mahadevi, in the Gita. The closest we come to it is a few chapters ago, where Sri Krishna was describing that his higher nature is Paraprakriti, identical with his Supreme Self. And it is from that union that all the jivas come forth. So, he's presaged what we're seeing here with the direct description of the Mahat Brahman as the womb of being, with that. So these 2 shlokas, separated by some chapters, are tied together. The idea that there is an intentional implantation of conscious force into this vast field of being, through which the multiplicity comes into play. So out of a oneness comes the many, but it does not divide the oneness. So it's like one multiplied endlessly to the view, but it's always the same one. Krishna has already said, I'm stationed in the heart of all beings, and he'll say it again shortly. So, he describes then, of course, how the guna is born of Prakriti, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. Bind us. Bind us in the body, bind us in the mind. And those of you who are students with us in the past, have had to sit through endless lectures on the Samkhya, the three gunas and their interactions, so I won't burden you with it tonight. I'll allow you to escape from it. But we have to say that Sattva is the principle of light and balance and equilibrium. We have to say that Rajas is the principle of dynamism, restless activity, constant, unillumined motion. And Tamas is the very principle of inertia, of darkness, of obscurity. So everyone, every being moving in this moving world is composed of all three gunas. But one will become dominant in us according to our nature, according to how we fashion ourselves in the world, how we grow. We can, with diligence and effort, move from darkness to light, as we just chanted a few moments ago. But if we don't, if we ignore the call to climb higher, then we continue to go around and around in a circle. Also, we can go down. We can go up, we can stay where we are, or we can go down, according to our actions and according to what is the nature of our consciousness. So we are not excused by saying, oh, I'm part of the Supreme, from all obligation to act, just saying weakly that the Divine's will is working in me, so I'll just sit back and let it coast. No, you have an obligation to direct your nature to move Godwards, if so you wish to go, without an implicit demand that the Divine lift you up. It is an idea of partnership that is being suggested there. Sri Aurobindo, in his synthesis of yoga, said, he who chooses the infinite has been chosen by the infinite. And it's also been said that if you take one step towards God, God takes 2 steps towards you. Waiting, able to help. Waiting for us to invite. Not insisting, but calling you. Do you want to come? So the sign of one who has achieved will not be an outward one. One who has realized, in a sense, sits above, udasinata, as if seated above all things, equal to all. Regarding happiness, suffering as the same. Gold, mud, stone, the same. Friend, enemy, pleasant, unpleasant. They have an equal regard to things. Now, Krishna has this equal regard to things too. But if you look at how he conducts himself outwardly in the play of the Mahabharata in the war, you can see that he has many complexions. He's like a chameleon, many moods. So it's not the idea that the sage sits stolidly, unengaged in life. No, to see whether this person is inwardly balanced and equal to all things requires us to develop that kind of consciousness, and only then can you see it. One who is enlightened can see the enlightenment in the other. Self sees self. So he closes the 15th chapter saying, I, Purushottama. He doesn't use that word here. Am the foundation of the silent Brahman and the imperishable spiritual existence and of the eternal Dharma and of utter Sukham, sheer bliss, true happiness. So this is remarkable. He said that I am that thing which is unmoving and beyond the universe. I am also the eternal Dharma working itself out in the universe. And I am the happiness that all beings are seeking as they follow the Dharma that is appropriate to them, as they work underneath the yoke of the universal Dharma. So there is no division. There is only differentiation of this one. Who drives that differentiation? That Supreme Person does, in alliance with us, who are that figured small. Yes? And so now, the 15th chapter. Purushottama Yoga, proper. And he begins with the image of the Ashwatha tree. You remember this from the Veda. With its original source above, its branches stretch downwards. The leaves are the hymns of the Vedas. And who knows this is indeed the Veda knower. So, all the roots of trees that we know start from the earth, yes? And go up. But this is that wonderful banyan tree, that ficus. And, from one limb, it drops a root down. And as this spreads, it becomes a very wide tree, no? And where is its real root? Well, you can say it's always above. This is the image, for us, of the world. You can see this even reflected in the Sankhya philosophy. The idea that the true source of things is above. And then things move downwards. So above, buddhi. And then ahankara. And then manas. And then the various fields of the objects and the senses that look at the objects stretching down into matter. So again, it lands in matter. Matter is not the beginning of things. It's the farthest extension of conscious being, and always conceals consciousness at its root. And so the universe climbing back, because look what happens. We wake up to the field of the senses. We wake up to the sense of the mind. We wake up to the sense of self. We find out what is behind the self, and all the time we're climbing the stair of the universe back to that. We're evolving. Pardon me for using that word. It's the truth. We're evolving consciously towards that supreme. And the Gita is fully with us in this. Sees the divine invested here. This world is not a lie and a cheat. But we have to shake off the confusion and recognize that the divine is in charge of this entire play. Look at the 7th verse in the 15th chapter when you have a chance. He says in it, it is an eternal portion of me that becomes the jiva in the world of living creatures and cultivates the subjective powers of Prakriti, mind, and the 5 senses. This carries us back to the idea of para-prakriti. Remember, that's the supreme nature. There's a supreme nature, there's an ordinary nature where the three gunas play, and the supreme is sending forth the jivas into action in the world. So that's what we really are. We're cognate with his supreme self from that third status of the Purusha. We're not even primarily or only the universal Atman. We are this jiva which is both, which is above and beyond both. So we can, sitting and acting in this body, be at one in the same moment, the universal Atman, acting in the world, Atma Shakti, but also obeying what our personal truth is, because it is uniquely linked with the Supreme. No division. So, you are personal, you are universal, and you're one with the Supreme. And this is the progression that the individual must make. This is the full progression to achieve oneness with that divine, and that takes you to his nature. He, and I'm in the 19th shloka here, he who undiluted has knowledge of me as Purushottama, adores me with all knowledge and in every way of his natural being. That person is undiluted. Undiluted. Because he's beyond the mutable, and he's beyond even the immutable. And that is why he's the Purushottama. And that nature he shares with us when we reach the core of our being, which is the jiva. That is Purushottama's truth embedded in us. And I am rather racing, I know. We're on to the 16th chapter now, where he talks about the difference between the Deva and the Asura. Well, you're all godlike people. Daivika. So I'm not going to beat you with a stick about what is an Asura. But note that the first characteristic of one who shares the godlike quality is that of fearlessness, amaya. One has no sense of fear, because one lives in communion with that. One has the sense of vastness. What can touch you? What can touch you? When you're identified with that, what could cause you fear? The body may quake. The untrained personality, which doesn't share that sense of immortality because it's part of the Kshara Purusha, that may become alarmed. But inwardly, yes, Abhaya. Just to illustrate, purity of temperament, steadfastness in the yoga of knowledge, so not getting confused by the world, giving, being generous, controlling oneself, offering, sacrifice. In other words, all of your actions go into the fire that carries the offering upwards to the Supreme. Being straightforward, being harmless, speaking truth, modesty, freedom from restlessness, patience, these many, many different characteristics. You can see where they're going. These are all wonderful virtues that can be cultivated. If we find their opposites in us, good. Let's look at what the opposites are and erase them by practicing what installs the goodness. And the unhappiness of the Asura, well, resorting to insatiable desire, arrogance, full of self-esteem, imagining that desire and enjoyment are all the aim of life, Krishna says, they are the prey of a devouring, a measurelessly unceasing care and thought and endeavor and anxiety till the moment of their death. Well, this is the very picture that the Upanishad says that hunger, that is death, is the nature of the world. As long as you agree to live on the surface of things, then it is the logic of the fish. Big fish eats the little fish. You're a fish, you're swimming around, you're trying to get as much as you can get. It's only when you step back from that and realize your essential nature that you're no longer involved in the play. That is freedom. Otherwise, you're caught in the chain, and whether you go up or down according to your actions, you say, the Asura says, today I have gained this object of my desire. Tomorrow I shall have that other. Today I have so much wealth. Tomorrow I shall have even more. I have killed my enemy. Tomorrow I will kill the rest. I am Lord and King of men. I am perfect, accomplished, strong, happy, fortunate. I am wealthy, high-born. Who is there like unto me? I will sacrifice, I will give, I will enjoy. You see, it's the reverse image of what is the Purushottama, who shares himself endlessly with all, who sees himself stationed in all beings. Here, one can see a possible spiritual change for the Asura. He has this nature that takes him, in a sense, towards the Godhead, but always on an egoistic basis. He's always attracted to the practice of yoga. He's always attracted to the promise of that divine splendor. He wants that supreme knowledge. And as he draws near it, his ego becomes more and more obvious to him. And he can, in a moment, see that ego crack in half and fall away, and resort to the Supreme. By wrestling with God, he can become one with God. So even for the Asura, there is no door closed. Purushottama accepts all according to their nature. So 3 things you have to renounce. And later we'll talk about the 3 things you must not renounce. But the 3 things we have to give up, put away from us, are desire, greed, and anger. These things are the mark of rootedness to the old nature. Vivekananda struggled with anger up until the end of his life. Never felt that he really conquered it. I have a good friend who lived in the ashram for many years. He said, I never really conquered anger, I simply learned how to suppress it. He said, because I didn't like what it did to the atmosphere if it came out. But he said, I realize I have not conquered it. So even after 30, 40, 50 years of intensive practice, Mother's sunlit way is the better path. Live in the light of the soul. Live from the felicity that's inside you. And there is little room for the play of anger after that. Little room for the play of desire. You go hankering after things, the divine is always asking, what do you need that for? I thought I was enough for you. Well, in the 17th chapter, Krishna takes up Shraddha, faith, and applies it to various categories of our being. But a man becomes as he is shaped by his faith. Faith for us is not belief. Faith is an inborn knowledge in the soul. It is something in us that recalls its divine origin and refuses to quit when all the world is contrary to it. This is faith. It marches on. It never quits. Whatever faith you have in yourself, if you work upon it, if you strengthen it, like strengthening a muscle, it will bring the goal to you. It will carry you to the goal. Defining yourself in a small way, being conscious only of your limitations, is to be conscious only of the outside form, the nama and the rupa that you currently possess. That is that kshara purusha. To know that you are the jiva, that the Supreme is active in you, missions you to go forward and act according to that truth. Your truth is not another's. And again, I won't go through the entire list of what is sattvic, what is rajasic, what is tamasic. But I want to come to the formula in the 23rd shloka of this 17th chapter, where Krishna says the formula Om Tat Sat is the triple definition of the Brahman. With the pronunciation of Om, the acts of sacrifice, yajna, giving, dana, ascesis, tapas, as laid down in the rules, are always commenced by the knowers of the Brahman. So these three, as we'll see, are the things that you never give up. But with the pronunciation of the Om, and you remember looking at the Mandukya Upanishad, which might be roughly contemporaneous with the teaching of the Gita, that it contains the entire universe. It contains the subtle world, the creative consciousness of the divine. It contains the absolute, unpartite nature of the impersonal. It contains also what is beyond all of these stations. And so when you say Om, that has that sense. I remember a singer in India saying that when you pronounce the word Om, it is not an Om like that. But you have to have that sense of drone. It's never truly an M. It's Om. The M never really sounds, but that fourth note representing that supreme status of the divine continues on. So your lips don't quite close, and that drone carries it forward, as if all the universe and every possibility, every status of being is all threaded upon that sound, which is the essence, the vocalization of Om. But then the Gita goes on to say, Om Tat Sat. So what is Tat? Tat means that. And Tat calls our attention to that supreme status. We may be acting in the world, but we have to be aware of that essential realization of the divine beyond the play of the phenomenal world is what we must get. Without that, we don't really have freedom. We must have that. And then Sat, which is the truth, the goodness of being here. This is the positive, the aspect of Brahman which manifests itself. And Sat means real. Satya means the truth. So the truth of our being is based in this, which is the expression of Tat, which is one aspect of Om. Om Tat Sat. So, firm, abiding in sacrifice, giving, and ascesis, yajna, dana, tapas, and all works done with this central view as these things, then we live in Sat. And whatever is done by someone without faith, without giving, without effort, in other words, with the falsity of purpose, nothing comes to them. They are in the asat, non-being. It doesn't count. So the sincerity of your nature, that is it. So, the 18th chapter then, the last in the Bhagavad Gita. So Arjuna asks a pertinent question. What's the difference between sannyasa and tyaga? This allows us again to make a useful distinction. The way of the Gita is not the way of renunciation, not the renunciation of the world. To shave your head, put on the ochre robe, and walk away from all responsibilities is not Krishna's teaching. That is an outer symbol. One should instead practice tyaga, which is the inner freedom, the inner renunciation of the fruit of the work. Remember, back in the 2nd chapter, he said, you have a right to the work only, no right to the fruit. So, if you can live in that kind of state inwardly, where you have renounced the claim to what is out there, that's the real renunciation, because you recognize increasingly that it belongs to me, that all this work that is done is coming to me. Even your offering is me doing the offering through you, comes back to me. And he's saying, I'm not saying that you're separate from me, you are me. You're not only my child, you are me. How can you be lost to me? Come to me. Come to me in all the ways of your being. Come to me in your mind. Come to me in your heart. He said, but definitely, in the 3rd shloka, do not renounce sacrifice, giving, and effort. I demand that of you. By the effort, you improve the nature. You move from tamas to rajas to sattva, and perhaps to the divine paraprakriti, nature beyond. By giving, you break down walls of separation. You're not miserly, you're offering again and again. So there's a confluence. Energy moves in, energy moves out, no walls. Right? And the sacrifice means that consciously you act in communion with the divine. made a note for myself that I wanted to read this to you. This is the 30th shloka. It says, that which sees the law of action and the law of abstention from action, the thing that is to be done and the thing that is not to be done, what is to be feared, what is not to be feared, what binds the spirit of man, and what sets it free, that understanding is sattvic. When to know that I do this, when to know I do not do this. This is the inner eye of wisdom that opens at some point. And that is sattvic. The Rajasic man barrels ahead and does what he wants to, and always does and gives with a sense of himself at the forefront. And the Tamasic man cares nothing about rhythms at all, doesn't look for the proper occasion, is ignorant of the origin of the offering and of the way in which it should be given and of who actually receives it. So for that one, we come back to the idea of swabhava in the 42nd shloka. The metaphysic that we have been shown reveals that above, in that abode of the Supreme, the nature of the Purushottama, which is Paraprakriti, the Supreme Nature, issues forth limitless numbers of jivas, the individual soul, all stationed from that. Again, each jiva, as it comes here, develops its own nature in nature, its own way of being, which is the swabhava. That is a soul force. Through that swabhava is chosen, life after life after life, a swadharma, a principle, method, a kind of law which will govern how we conduct ourselves in the world. So all of these are distinguished. The soul force, and the active nature demonstrated here. So to know ourselves fully, we have to come to an integral knowledge of all of our being. So what Krishna is, in a sense, doing with Arjuna here is bringing him back to point. We began with the great warrior Arjuna on the battlefield, a kshatriya, ready to do battle, that then becomes faint-hearted when he sees that he's got to kill Bhishma and Drona and all of his great teachers on the other side, and wants to walk away, wants to renounce the world and leave, but he cannot, because it is not his nature to do that, it is not his swabhava. Because the Brahman, the priest, will have his kind of way of being, so will the kshatriya, so will the vaishya, who produces wealth, so will the shudra, who serves. According to the nature of the soul is the nature of the work given. That nature grows, as we have seen, and changes. But that soul remains pure and unaffected inside. So he concludes saying to Arjuna, look, better is one's own law of works, though in itself faulty, than an alien law well wrought out. One does not incur sin when one acts in agreement with the law of one's own nature. What can be more comforting to us than to know that the best that the best thing we can do is to be ourselves. Just to be who we are. Still expressing in life the strong aspiration based on faith that we will go forward and we will achieve objectives which are set for us, which we do not desire, but for which we aspire. We make no claim upon the work. That is, the fruit of the work done belongs to that. But ours is the opportunity for growth in the action. So the Gita then, in a sense, summarizes what its teaching has been to this point. And it says, 49th shloka on here in the 18th chapter. An understanding without attachment in all things. A soul self-conquered, empty of desire. This man attains by renunciation a supreme perfection of desireless work, naishkarmya. What has been renounced is the self-agency, the claim to the work. Now, having attained this perfection, one attains to the Brahman, that which is the supreme concentrated direction of the knowledge, uniting the purified intelligence, controlling the whole being by firm and steady will, renouncing sound and the other objects of the senses, withdrawing from all liking and disliking, resorting to impersonal solitude, abstemious, speech, body, and mind controlled, constantly united with the inmost self through meditation, dhyana, completely giving up desire and attachment, putting away egoism, violence, arrogance, desire, wrath, the sense and instinct of possession, free from all I-ness and my-ness, calm, luminously impassive, one is fit to become the Brahman. When one has become the Brahman, when one, serene in the self, neither grieves nor desires, when one is equal to all beings, then one gets the supreme love and devotion to me. By devotion, he comes to know me, who and how much I am, and in all the reality and the principles of my being, having thus known me, enters into that, the Purushottama. And by doing also all actions, always lodged in me, he attains by my grace the eternal and imperishable status. Devoting all yourself to me, giving up in your conscious mind all your actions to me, resorting to the yoga of the will and intelligence, with the yoga, be always one in heart and consciousness with me. This is the 57th shloka. 58. If you are one in heart and consciousness with me at all times, then by my grace, prasad, you shall pass safe through all difficult and perilous passages. And then he says, as if putting his arm around Arjuna, he says, vain is your resolve that in egoism you'll think, I will not fight. Your nature will appoint you to the work. What from delusion you desire not to do, that helplessly you will be bound to do, born of your svabhava. You can't escape the force of your own soul. And then he says this memorable verse, the Lord, Arjuna, is seated in the heart of all beings, turning all beings' mountain as if upon a machine by his Maya. In him, take refuge in every way of your being, and by his grace you'll come to the supreme peace and the eternal status. Having reflected on it fully, do as you would. Further, hear the most secret, the supreme word that I shall speak to you. He's getting to the conclusion here. Because I love you, I will speak for your good. Now pay close attention here. This is the 65th shloka. Become my minded, my lover and adorer, a sacrificer to me. Bow yourself to me. To me you shall come. This is my pledge and promise to ye, because you are dear to me. My minded, the yoga of knowledge, my lover and adorer, bhakti yoga, the yoga of heart, the yoga of love, sacrificer to me, bow down to me. This is the karma yoga. So, in other words, it isn't one or the other. Choose one. It's all at once. The one who is fully yoked, yukta, who lives in conscious communion with the Supreme in his mind, in his heart, in his actions, will be taken to the greatest felicity. And then the great close. Abandon all dharmas and take refuge in me alone. I will deliver you from all sin and evil. Do not grieve. At that point, when one is yoked thoroughly, integrally with the Supreme, you no longer need a dharma. You don't need a way of being. You don't need a law. You don't need a shastra. You need no code book. Because the inspiration of the divine intelligence in you will guide your hand, will lift your heart to the task, will illuminate your vision so that you see through all perplexities. You are ready then for the divine life. You are ready for the life divine. Do not grieve, he's reminding Arjuna. Now, go back. Go back. Yes, it's tough. You have to slay your teachers, your kinsmen, but it is necessary. And so, Krishna says, have you heard me? Have you listened to me with a concentrated mind? Has your delusion now been destroyed? And Arjuna says, destroyed is my delusion. I have regained memory. He knows his own being. This is not the memory of who he was, Arjuna the prince. Now he knows what the jiva is inside him. I have regained memory through your grace. I am firm, dispelled of my doubts. I will act according to thy word. And so he moves back into action, takes up his bow. The battle commences. Dharma is saved, and India continues to be the home of the Sanatana Dharma because they had the courage to resume and act in the world in God illumination. And so must we act in this world, fearlessly, based in samatha, equality, seated above udasinata, yoked, yukta, at that. That one. Huh. When we studied the Gita before, we spent months. We spent weeks on each chapter. So, to do 6 chapters a night is a foolishness I don't know that I will repeat. Anyway, you've been very kind to listen. Do you have any questions or comments tonight?
The only question I had in the reading was, it's a little trivial since the unfolding of the whole 18th chapter, but it's still in my head, so I'm going to ask it. What other rules of the Shastra? It mentions that in the 17th chapter, but doesn't elaborate on it. I don't know enough to know what they are.
The Manu Smriti does not exist at this point in Indian history. But the Dharma Sutras do exist by now. But they're simpler commandments about how the 4 orders of society are meant to act. The Shastric influence is not so supreme. The caste order does not exist at this point in Indian history. It is beginning to come into shape. It is coming into being. So, if you'd like to see the Dharma Sutras, I frankly have had trouble getting a good English translation. I can give you the Sanskrit if you want that.
Just wanted to know what they were.
Yeah. So they are not Vedic in origination. They are even post-Upanishadic age. But they're preliminary to what would be called the teachings of Manu later. That's actually quite a bit later. I don't remember if we talked about the dating of the Gita, but there is a core in this, as I think we may have mentioned. At some point, the Bhagavad Gita may have stood on its own as an Upanishad. It was so integral to the purveyance of the Mahabharata as an epic that it found its natural home in that. The original core of the Bhagavad Gita may have been a few hundred verses, which later were expanded to roughly 700, let's say. The age may have been as early as 500 BCE and may have continued in formation up to 200 CE. The Mahabharata, unlike the Rig Veda, we have there are many, many, many recensions. I think there are 14 different versions of the Mahabharata, in which the Gita is an episode. Interestingly, we only have one version of the Gita, except for the Kashmiri version. There's a Kashmiri edition where I think there are 2 shlokas which differ from what we have in the main. They're not big differences, but it's interesting because it shows us that there may have been other versions of the Gita. What we can say is that Krishna is a historical figure. He figures in the Chandogya Upanishad as one who gained instantaneous enlightenment. You can put it that way. When his teacher, a rishi, spoke the word to him, the great gurus in those days whispered the word in the ear. And usually that was the seed that got planted and one would eventuate, after years of dedicated work, into the realization of the divine presence. But in Krishna's case, he heard the word and that was it. He was in it. We have seen how figured in the Veda presages this twinning of Krishna and Arjuna in the Gita. Nara, Narayana, Indra. Many, many lines in which we can see that these figures have come down, always working in significant alliance, following a thread of development through coursing humanity, as if Krishna comes and wants to demonstrate a new possibility to the evolving consciousness upon earth. And then, as always, the need for a human disciple, or a human companion, a partner that can share this wealth. Because simply to demonstrate it nakedly himself is no challenge. But to make it assignable to human nature, to make it transmissible to another, to pass that lamp of knowledge to a human who's receptive and ready for it, requires somebody to be an Arjuna in every age. And this is what every spiritual teaching is looking for. How does this get transmitted to the next generation? And if you have had a breakthrough into a new consciousness, how do you incorporate that? How do you embody that in such a way that it can be suffused into another's being? It's all the problem of life. No one person, having realized it, makes it permanent. It has to become a lattice work of light moving everywhere. Yes. Any other questions? So we'll go for our meditation then. It's a wonderful thing to have you with us. Thank you for coming. Namaste. Jai Ma. Next week, Samkhya, Jainism, Buddhism. We get started in